It is December 13th, 1984. My name is Joe Todd, and this is an interview with Mr. Rudolph Treiber in Shattuck, Oklahoma. Mr. Treiber, where were you born?
I was born in the southern part of Russia. In the area between what they call the Caucasus Mountains, which is the state of Georgia, and the Sea of Osif, which is connects to the Black Sea.
Mm-hmm. When is your birthday?
October the 4th, according to the Russian calendar.
What year?
1906.
1906. And what was the nearest town?
The nearest town was a little town by the name of, I will look on the map here, Armistice. It is close to a little bigger town by the name of Stavropol.
How do you spell that?
Stavropol is Stavropol. It's within a few miles of Armistice, and I was born in neither one of them towns. I was born in a little agricultural settlement like they have in Germany. The agricultural people, they farm an area and live in a community and go out in the daytime and farm and come back of a night, just like they have in Germany. And it was close by Armistice. And they called that little settlement Kuban Gebiet. Kuban Gebiet, named after the river Kuban, which flowed past it there from the Caucasus Mountains to the Black Sea. And Gebiet means settlement, or be a small, it wouldn't even be as big as a town. It'd be an agricultural settlement. Gebiet. Kuban is named after the river. Kuban Gebiet is right on the Kuban River by Armistice. And
who is your father?
Wilhelm Treiber.
Wilhelm Treiber.
And he was born, I believe, his birthday was July the 1st, and he was born in 1867. Mm-hmm. And he was born in Russia also, and his folks were born there.
What was your mother's name?
Maria, and her maiden name was Renner. R-E-N-N-E-R, Maria Renner.
Mm-hmm. Now, were your parents of German descent?
Yes, 100% German. They couldn't even speak a word of Russian.
How did the Germans get to Russia?
It was a few generations before my parents, several generations. I'd have to look it up in an encyclopedia. Anybody could look it up in an encyclopedia. The Russian government made a deal with the German government that they would let the people go and settle this area and live like they do in Germany, and they wouldn't be subject to too much of the Russian government. They could more or less, they could have their own churches, their own schools, everything German, and that's how come they settled over there. It's just right north of Turkey. It's a nice community, agricultural community, but Russia had, well, they own, they have 1 acre out of every 7 in the Soviet Union, and they didn't have the people, and Russia is made up of foreign people. Their native people are, well, it's questionable just what you would call them, but that was the deal. Russia had a czar instead of a president or whatever, but at that time they had they called him Tsarin, and it was a lady, and the controlling end of the German government were related to her.
Hey, was that Catherine?
Yes, that's the one.
Catherine the Great?
Catherine the Great.
That's when the Germans went to Russia.
Yes, and Catherine the Great was German. She was related to the head of the German government. They made a deal. It's in the encyclopedia. to settle this part of Russia.
What kind of work did your father do?
Agriculture.
He was a farmer.
Agriculture.
Do you have any memories of Russia?
None whatsoever, because when I was, my first birthday was between somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean when they come.
Okay. Did your parents ever talk about life in Russia?
Yes, quite a lot.
What did they say about it?
Well, it was a wonderful country. Everything that they planted, they could depend on it growing. They didn't have to worry about rain or hail and all, but it got, as time went on, why, it got, there's, you know, they could tell there's a lot of unrest in the government. It looked like the time was coming when it wouldn't be stable anymore, where they could depend on it, and they would be the first ones persecuted, so a lot of them, you know.
Did your parents ever talk about the Russo-Japanese War, 1903?
1903? Well, some. I have just a faint, I just can remember that they did, you know. Now, they talked about several wars that Russia had with Turkey, and as large as Russia is and as small as Turkey is, they got whipped every time they started over that border, see? Russia, Turkey doesn't have but a small area, you see all of that, but Russia, even what it is, was about time. It's collected there.
What kind of house did you live in Russia? Your parents?
It was, you couldn't call them sod houses. What they'd done, and they was good houses. They built them even in this country after they got here. You would plow up the good, rich, pretty rich earth, you know, and you would mix a lot of straw in with it. And the way they done it, I remember when I was a child, they would get a couple of horses and just go round and round in there and keep watering it, you know, and get all the straw in this mud here that they could, and then they would build a house out of it, you know, just set her up just to...
They make bricks out of that mud?
No, they just set them up with something like a mud fork, you know, and then they would shape the sides, and then it was pretty nice. And they would stand for years and years, because the straw in it would keep them from eroding, you know. And inside they would plaster them with material they had, and there was nothing.
Did your parents ever talk about the Tsar?
About the Tsar?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Nicholas II?
Yes.
What did they say about him?
Well, the living conditions wasn't bad at all under the Tsar. They just got along fine.
How come they had that revolution then in Russia?
Well, you know, that's, I couldn't, you know, there's a lot of politics, and it is just like any other country. You have different opinions, and they, what they'd done was the opposition that they had against their government and all got control of the army, you see, and then they just turned the guns on the rest of them and made them submit. So it was a bad revolution. And persecution is what they conquered it by, just plain old persecution.
Why did your parents decide to leave Russia?
Well, in our case was my mother had a twin brother, and he was a well-educated man in his day on their local governments, you know, and he no doubt he knew more about the situation as far as the unrest that was building up in this huge country of Russia. So he emigrated to this country and located right here about 4 miles southwest of Shattuck. And it's 2 miles west of the golf course corner here, right on the corner.
What year did he come to this country?
I can't tell you for sure, but he come ahead, so give or take just a little bit, it was probably about 1905, 4 or 5. But my parents came over here in the summer of 1907. and he was here and well located. He had a little, there was at that time land to be filed on, you know, with you and whatever, and if you was too late for that, you could buy somebody out that was dissatisfied for a few dollars, and that's where he located. And so he kept working on my parents, as my mother was his twin sister. I'm sure she was a little closer to him, you know, than anyone else would be, and he kept after them till they came home. And they always give him credit for it. In the later years, when the revolution and all that, first they was dissatisfied because this country here, agriculture, doesn't compare with the one they come from. And at that time, you know, everything was done more or less by hand and all, and it depended so much more on the climate as it does now. And it was awful rough, and they was really dissatisfied. My father often told me, and it's a good thing he didn't have, if he'd had the money enough to go back, he'd have went back the next week after he got it. But, you know, that's the way it hits you when you go to a strange country, absolutely strange. And, you know, everything different. But by a lot of hard work, why, he raised us kids. And the best thing my father ever done to me is get me out of Russia before I knew enough on my own. Because by the time I had grown up where I had decided it'd been too late.
Yep. What are your first memories of this area around here?
Well, my first memories is, pardon me, is a lot of hard work of the older people, you know, like my parents, and about the first memories, my father mixed the mud and done the heavy work for George Schultz's general store. And he walked to town every morning, these 4 miles, it's about 5 miles where we are, straight across. He walked to town every morning, put in a hard day's work. In them days you had no cement mixer or nothing, you done everything by hand. I was a little boy, about 6 years old then, and I just remember it well. And every evening he'd walk back, and that was to subsidize our 80 acres that we tried to make a living on. And that was my first memory.
Did your parents teach you English or German, or both?
You know,
German.
when I was about 9 years old, I couldn't speak one word of English. I went to school and learned ABC and all that, but I didn't know what it was all about.
Tell me about your early schools.
Well, I started school at, there used to be a country school out here, they called the Himble School. You know, they had a district about every 4 miles, you know, in them days. And that's where I started. And the first morning that I went to school, I remember Amelia Mowry, which was a Boris. Her name was Boris. And later she married, her husband's name was Mowry. Amelia died about a year ago, I'd say, or, you know, and, but she come by and picked me up. The folks dressed me up the best they could and put on a little a ribbon for necktie, as near as I remember, and I was so proud. She took me by the hand and led me this mile, and I just felt like I was getting ready to go to Washington and meet the president. I remember that. And it was one of the best schools that I ever went to. We happened to have a lady, Mrs. Laux. My first teacher's name was Laux, I remember that. And she didn't bother with getting me a primary book to start on. Every night she would send first one word and then 2 or 3, write it down on a little piece of paper, and I memorized that word and the syllables in it. I started learning syllables as soon as I started my ABCs, and to this day I can still pronounce any English word that comes in print, if it's not a foreign word, because I can see the syllable in it. And I think that, and I have often been so grateful for that because I can read well above the average.
During the First World War, while you were in school, do you have anyone make fun of you because you were German and we were fighting the Germans?
Do what now?
No, in the First World War,
Yeah.
1917. Did any of the kids make fun of you because you were German?
Well, it got so bad one time we would fight, yes. It got so bad that I was at that time going to a school where the majority was English and the minority were German. We had moved at the time. So the school board and the teacher finally decided that they would draw a line across the schoolyard and the Germans fought the English. Foolishness, you know.
What would the kids do to you?
Well,
The English kids.
Well, they would blame you for everything they read in the paper that's going on overseas, and of course we was all proud. Everyone, well, we'd even fight across that line, you know, to cuss one another because damn so and so, you know. But it was all kids' food. We got along good with the people that had common horses, you know, but as kids, it was rough.
What about Armistice Day? The day the war ended, what'd you do?
Well, that was quite a relief. Yes, everybody felt like celebrating and did, and at least if he didn't, he felt like it because I don't know if anybody that wouldn't have felt like that was one of the best things that ever happened. I'll tell you. Yes, that. But we have got a reputation even to this day. We got along with our neighbors, English or whatever they are, still do, and we've got neighbors down there. We still have our little farm down there that we have respect for one another, but no problem. It's,
As a little boy, what chores did you do on the farm?
well, took care of the chickens and just lighted stuff. We didn't have too many cows to milk because we just didn't have anything. Feed the pigs, and you know, we just, there wasn't a whole lot of work. It's not like now. My wife and me works here, and I take care of 75 head of cattle. That my parents, the total cattle they ever raised in all their life, I don't suppose was 70 head because they was working people and, you know, just agriculture. Try to raise it all for the soil, you know.
What did your parents say during the Russian Revolution, 1917, 1918? Then were they glad they came to this country?
You bet. My mother didn't live to enjoy too much of that because her health got bad, and my mother passed away in May of, I believe it was 1st May, I can look it up, in 1922. And my father lived till 1956. And then they left some people behind, of course. I do remember till shortly after the war ended, we did hear from my father's sister once in a great while, but that finally come to an end. And even then, them letters that you get, you know, was censored. You just got whatever they wanted you to hear.
Any idea what happened to her?
Man, never.
Any idea what happened to your brother or sister?
Matilda, her name was Matilda, I remember that. And she was a few years younger than my daddy. I wouldn't know her age or nothing, but she was probably born in the early 1870s. But she was younger, and we would hear from her once in a while. But no, they wouldn't. If she told you in that letter what she was doing and things wasn't going good or something like that, that part would just be destroyed. You never heard, but you heard nothing. You just heard, you knew they was alive and all, and they could have been half starving to death, and they'd still say they was getting along good, or you never would have got it. You see, It's just like, you can imagine what it was then compared to what it is now. You still can't come and go, you know.
Right. When your parents were farming in Russia, did they own their farm?
Well, yes, acreage, small acreage.
How large was it?
Well, that I can't tell you. It wouldn't be too large because in them days everything was done by hand. Practically you plowed with a couple of horses and a single plow. You know, you didn't get much acreage done. You didn't need too much acreage to make a living because the production was good.
But they did own the land in Russia at that time.
Yeah, they did at that time.
Yeah.
And then the cattle, everybody had a milk cow or two, you know, and they were kept in your backyard of a night. And then of a morning, the cow herder would come by, and everybody turned his cow out, and she just followed it. He'd take them out to the countryside and graze them, and of an evening, come down the little streets, you know, and the cow would just automatically know where she went in your backyard, and you close the gate. And, yeah, it was, and it's just, it was, of course, in them days you could come and go. If you wanted to leave Russia, just get your passport and go, for which you can't anymore. I haven't been to Russia, but in '69 I went to East Berlin, and I went through checkpoint Charlie. Well, when the Russian people asked for my identification, I showed them and gave them my passport, you know. And it had my picture in it, and what it said, my passport said, American citizen born in Russia. It didn't say when I was born in Russia or nothing, and I like to never got this checkpoint Charlie.
Why?
Because I was protected by our embassy because it was a special tour, you know what I mean. But they detained, they wouldn't let nobody go. That's just the way they are, because they couldn't interrogate me because it was part of the deal. They either let me go in or say you can't go, or the bus can't go, or, you know, they had that privilege. But just to be, they took and had long mirrors, say about 3 foot long, 1.5 foot wide on 2 wheels. They were on it under that bus for seemed like hours around that, and that was a bus that was sponsored by the American Express.
What year was that?
1969.
1969. How come you went to Europe? What was the reason?
Oh, our son was in the United States Army, and he was stationed in Grafenwöhr, which is a proving ground, and we just took a notion we'd just fly the corridor. We went down, got his ticket on Pan American, we flew the corridor, went to Berlin.
Why?
And we decided we'd go to East Berlin.
Yeah.
And didn't see nothing after we got over there.
What was the Russian soldiers' reaction to you?
They're very disrespectful. Oh yeah, they're just as snotty as you make them. Yeah, they don't. I don't believe the Russian people ever taught anybody to have any respect for them. You know, we can read a lot of that in the paper. You know what I mean? They're very, very.
Okay. How many years did you go in school?
How many years did I go to school? I went to school. I don't know how many years I went to school, but when the time I was 16 years old, I was through the 8th grade. I just took the grade. But I went to school, and I could have got out through the 8th grade, of course, sooner than that, but then there was no chance for me to go to college or anything like that in them days. And so I took it easy in the 7th and 8th grade. In fact, the matter is I went about 2 winters on each one of them, and I pretty well learned them old brown back books from cover to cover. You know, there is such a thing if you can't go to college, if you make up your mind and all, the school will start you off where you can get the fundamentals of it and you can educate yourself for the rest of life. Keep on. And that's what I've done, is just try to keep up with the world with, you know.
After you finished school, what did you do?
Well, after I finished school, we worked on a farm, and I had a younger sister, and my mother passed on, and my little sister, she started cooking for us. When she was 10 years old, she could cook you just as good a meal as the average housewife. And she baked bread, and then she wound up to be one of the best cooks in this country. She's still cooking for the grade school over here, has for 25 years at least, not longer than that. My wife worked there 19. She's pretty close to 30 years.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
That I can remember, now we had one little sister that passed on in infancy before my time that I, of course, wouldn't remember. But I had Bill Deal's mother was my oldest sister, and then I had a brother that was born in about 1897, I think it was. Tobias was his name.
They still living?
No, he's been gone for a number of years. And then and the next little brother that I can remember, and he died in 1913. He was born in 1903, and he died in 1913 because in them days he had ruptured appendicitis, appendix, and there wasn't anything they could do for him. I can remember when at his funeral I was, probably, well, I was 6 years old, yes.
What about the flu epidemic, 1918?
Well, it was pretty rough.
Did you have the flu?
Well, we had symptoms and touch of it, and I know a lot of people in our area. They wore a little chain around or a string around the neck with a little asafoetida sewed in a little rag that would, you know, keep down germs and stuff. But there was a lot of people. Of course, that's history. There's a lot of people died.
How many people around here died of that flu?
Well, it's hard to say. My wife's little brother was one of them, and in our immediate family, of course at that time that was her family, but in our family, or anyone close, we didn't have that kind of problems, you know, but really it wasn't so bad in our locality here as it was in a lot of other places, because we didn't have time to hardly even come to town, or didn't have much way. We just out here in the wide open country, and we got a little bit more fresh air than the average did. You know, but there was epidemics where the population was heavy. But there was quite a number of smaller children. I can name several of them, I guess. But that was about 1918, and in there I think it's one of the worst.
Yeah.
My father would say that you need to eat a little piece of garlic once in a while. That's good. He did. Like onions, you know. He just a little chunk of garlic once in a while. He said that keeps all that stuff away.
Did it work?
Well, yeah, it worked, because you know about anything you believe in works. You know, there's something to it. It helps in a way. Yeah, it was the good old days, but I know a lot of hard work, which doesn't hurt anybody. There isn't anyone that worked any harder than my dad did. And if he didn't find anything else to do, he'd dig a hole, turn around, and fill it up again. He lived to be almost 91 years old. I am past 78, and I still work. Take care of the water here.
Okay, what did you do in the 1920s?
In the 1920s, Oh, in the early 20s, I'll tell you what I'd done in 1923 and 24. I dug a sewer ditch by hand and hooked the Santa Fe Depot on the sewer system down there when they built it. That's how long I worked for the city off and on.
Mm-hmm. So you've worked for the city of Shattuck quite a while then.
This last go-round, better than 28 years.
Mm-hmm. You still have the farm?
Yeah. Yeah, we still farm. We take care of, well, pretty close to 80 head of cattle.
What kind of crops did you raise on the farm?
Well, anymore, we used to raise some row crop, you know, grain for horse feeding and cow feeding and all, and most of the wheat to try to make a living out of it. But anymore, we farm wheat and then we use for cow pasture.
Tell me about wheat harvest in the early days.
Well, I used to run a header. That was always my job for years, and it was just a lot of hard work. Cut it with a header, put it up in the wagon, you know, and then pitch it out and stack it, and then pitch it through the thrash machine again, and it was...
How many pieces of equipment did it take to harvest the wheat?
Well, to harvest it was what they call a header, you know, that cuts it and elevates it up in a rack, which they call a barge, you know. And it took a header, 6 head of horses to push it along, and then 2 wagons to haul it to the stack. One of them would be loading while the other one's unloading. And it took not less than 10 head of horses.
Did you shock the wheat?
Well, if you shock the wheat, they cut it with a binder. We always cut it with a header and stacked it, you know, not bound. There wasn't too much binding.
Yeah. How long did you let the wheat dry before it was thrashed?
Well, it didn't dry any, you might say, because as soon as harvest was over, somewhere in the thrash machines was done by a man that done nothing else, you know.
Who had a thrashing machine around here?
Jake Borth had a guy by the name of Jacob Borth. He had most of them. He had 2 big ones for years and years, and then there was quite a lot. Some of the Shane horses in the years back had thrashing machine, and John Shane Horse and his family used to do custom thrashing. And oh gosh, I remember a man that had, you know, that covered quite an area was a guy by the name, his last name was Groneman. And they come and go. There's been a lot of Faust brothers out here and steam engines and thrash machines.
How many acres of wheat did you have?
Did we have?
Yeah.
We never did have a big acreage. 150 acres is most.
How long would it take to cut the header?
It would, you could cut, it depends on, but you could cut about 20 some acres a day, easy enough. Everything had to be done by hand, you know, hand on it. It was.
Was the elevator here in Shattuck? The grain elevator?
Yes. Higgins, Shattuck. Higgins was, for our part of the country, straight south here. And Higgins used to be a good place to handle wheat, you know. They handled more than Shattuck did at the time. And Goodwin out here was a good place. Yeah, there used to be a town out here, Goodwin. They had grain elevator. When I was a teenager up to about 20 years old, I hauled most of our groceries behind the saddle in a tow sack from Grand. I'd go down to Grand. Used to be the county seat. We bought groceries down there at Grand for years when I was a kid.
How far from Shattuck is Grand?
Grand is now, if you went the closest way, you could go south here to the Canadian, approximate Canadian River, which is 17 miles, and then you'd follow that river road that just about another 5 miles, just follow the river, and that was my grandmother. Right now it's south of Ornette and probably 3 miles west, you know.
Now, over here, this elevator exploded here several years ago.
That's Farto.
What caused that?
Well, it's grain dust is explosive, like a ventilator. You know, you let grain dust, the dust that comes, now not the dust that comes off the straw, but stored wheat and moving it and all. You accumulate grain dust, and that itself is explosive.
What sets it off? What must be some sort of spark or something that sets that off.
Yes, it would be a spark.
Any idea what happened over there at Farto?
Yeah, it was an explosion. You know, it just.
What set it off, or did they know what caused it?
No, I don't know if they ever determined what set it off. There's a lot of things, because of friction and all that. Yeah. It's one of them things.
Mm-hmm.
But that's grain dust, and you know, the elevator, all the lights and all are in a food-proof, sealed up, you know, because everybody knows that if you would break a bulb, you know, the old type especially, bulb would bust or something like that. If there's any grain dust accumulation, like from, it must be kind of gaseous or whatever, because maybe not ventilated enough, you know, and it's explosive, and just like natural gas.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you ever think about
going back to Russia? No way. No way.
Or you ever sit and think about your parents living there, what it'd be like?
Oh, yeah, of course in them days it wasn't too much different here, you know what I mean, if they didn't. When I was in this country here, I was just born in 1906, that's not going back so far, it might seem far to you, but well, I got in on plowing with 2 horses and a walking plow and stuff like that. That wasn't too far.
How has farming changed?
How was it changed?
Yeah.
Well, you know, Henry Ford had a lot to do with a lot of things. We used to go horseback and all, and he made a Model T available for about everybody. And, you know, and then they got to making them old Fords and tractors, and, you know, it looked like uphill business for a long time, and it just gradually had to change, because, and now, why, it's changed, it's really nice, but I don't know.
So you can plow a lot more acreage in one day now than you did
but
back
everybody is, I feel sorry for these people. They spend too much money with the machine companies. You take a combine that you pay nowadays, you can't even touch one of them. They quit it like they want them for $100,000. Well, I would sure hate to get out here, raise $100,000 worth of wheat after the expenses is paid, and I would sure hate to just work for the machine companies. Like, you know, it's just like anything else. Some people make a go of it, and some just working for somebody else.
How did the Depression affect you and your family in the 1930s?
Well, it's not all that bad. We was poor people, and you know, poor people can't get much poorer sometimes. They just you learn to manage, and we earned our own living. We very seldom would take a can of cream to town and buy sugar and coffee, and the rest of it we didn't need because we had it. You know, you had your own meat and chickens and eggs and butter and whatever, and it was. But the Depression would hit the cities and where people depended on an everyday job, you know, for a living. Why But around here, the Depression was bad, but it wasn't as bad as if the people didn't depend on a paycheck to go buy something to eat, because we had chickens, eggs to sell all the time, you know, and you had cows to milk, at least 2 or 3, and everybody had enough cows to furnish milk and butter. Well, you take milk and butter and eggs and chicken and pig meat and cow meat and calf meat and what else you need? You need some sugar and coffee, that's a little salt, that's about it. You didn't have any money, you couldn't sell anything. Wheat was, I've seen wheat sell for less than 25 cents a bushel in the Depression. Well, there's no money in it. We took my brother and me during the Depression took a load of calf corn, thrashed calf corn, grain, you know, to Higgins. And a load was considered a standard wagon bed, hold about 56 bushel. And we took a half a bushel, what we call a half a bushel measure, you know. It's a bucket that holds a half a bushel that you measure grain with. We took a half a bushel of eggs and a small bucket of eggs. Set them right on top of this calf corn. A half a bushel of eggs, what a half a bushel measure would hold, and a smaller bucket full. And when we got to Higgins, we set the eggs off at Lobbin's store there at the corner and went and dumped a load of calf corn and come back and picked up our egg check, and we got more money for the eggs than we did for the load of calf corn. That's true.
What year was that?
That was in the Depression. Oh, we had 2 depressions. Now this, you know, we had a depression shortly after the war, in the early 20s, between 18 and 22 in there somewhere. Mine one, you couldn't sell it, you know. But you take, after poor old Hoover, you know, he got the brain for us. He was president. And that's when, in the very early, well, if I'm not mistaken, just before Roosevelt, or the first thing Roosevelt done and that was when you couldn't sell it. You couldn't even write a check on money you had in the bank until they audited every bank, because in them days a bank could go broke and what you had in there, you lost it, you know, and there wasn't no Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So they froze the banks for a few weeks and inventoried every one of them. And that affected business for a while. Yeah, there's been more than one depression. The big depression, remember it so well as people do, and that's all they talk about, is that wasn't the only depression we had, but it was the one we had with all the dirt storms.
Tell me about the dirt storms.
Oh, it was terrible. It's hard to believe. People would have to see it and experience it it would be unbelievable that one Sunday evening, and it hit down our way. It came from the north, just a boiling. All the birds was flying ahead of it, you know, didn't travel very fast. And just the dirt in the air, it got for a few minutes was total darkness. You couldn't see your hand and running back. And broad daylight, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Was that Black Sunday? That was April 35?
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Sounds about right. And I'm telling you, you'd have to go through it to even realize what could happen. That was solid dirt. It was so dark, the chickens went to roost. Just like it was night, and it was. And then I went in the house, and in half an hour or so, you know, in a short time, it got just a little bit lighter. It didn't stay that dark. And lit the old coal oil lamp in the house, and it was just this bright spot. Them old houses we had, of course, dust will get in anybody's house.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, we didn't have the windows you have now, storm windows and insulation and all that, and it would seep through that. It was
How
dark.
did you breathe in that dust?
Well, you just, I'll tell you what you had to do was hang wet sheets and stuff over your windows, you know, and if it got too bad, why, hang a damp cloth over your face would help. It was just, I tell you, it's something, if something like that happened now, why they would, I don't know what would do just like we did then, I guess. It comes on you, what are you going to do?
Can you tell me what maintenance you pulled on the wagons?
The what now?
What maintenance you had to pull on your wagon?
Maintenance, just
Yeah.
why, you outside of keeping the double trees and stuff like that, and if you repaired, grease it every time you went to town, and yeah.
How often do you have to grease the wheels, grease the axles?
Well, when we haul grain, I grease them on every trip. Yeah, you didn't do like now, buy a car and drive it for about the life of it, it's never grease the front wheels. Yeah, one trip is all they'd make. But they would hold it. Now it depends on the axle. If it is straight axle, you know, straight axle, you couldn't keep it greased. They tried them, you know. It was the way they made it. An axle on a wagon is at the back side of it, with the wheel goes on. It's twice as big a bore as in the front seat. It's different. Now that's the only axle that'll hold grease. That's the secret. That'll hold grease. You take a straight axle, it'll start squeaking before you get to town, because you want to grease. You just want it.
Yeah. What brand of wagons did you have?
Well, we had Rock Island Special, Studebaker, and there was Studebaker made wagons before they made automobiles.
Which was the best wagon?
Studebaker was hard to read.
It was?
You bet.
How much did a wagon cost?
Oh, around $100, a real good one.
Did that include the wagon sheets?
You bet. Yeah, we bought one. I remember we bought one at an auction sale that was just like new, 3 sets of boards.
What do you mean 3 sets of boards?
Well, sideboards.
Sideboards.
You had, the bottom board was permanent, you know, it was maybe 20 inches high, it holds so much, and then the next board that you could take off and put on, put it on, you'd haul pretty close to 60 bushel, 56 bushel was figured on the average, you know. And then another board, and then it was all 90 bushel. And that's the one we had. We bought it at a sale, and just like new, and I still remember we paid $106 for it.
Did that include the tongue and the single
You
double
bet.
trees?
You bet. Yep.
Well,
It's quite a time.
what else you want to talk about?
Well, in 1924, talk about wagons, I went down here to Bill Mitchell's, and I ordered me a Ford Roadster, Model T Ford Roadster, new, to come in, you know, later. Ordered it, and it was optional. $375 without the starter, where you'd have to crank it, or $400, and less than $50 with the starter. That was optional them days. $75 for the starter. That's the starter, generator, and battery. That fixed up your starter. You didn't have no voltage regulators. You didn't need stuff like that. And that was $75. You could buy them with or without. I was a poor guy, I ordered one with them. Out. You just crank it, and then when you got tired of cranking and could afford it, you go buy your starter, generator, and a battery. How ahead you are.
What were you doing on Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1941?
Well, we was on the farm, and by the time we heard about it, why, it was over. You know, Pearl Harbor Day was a bad day. I'll tell you what, I have been there several times in Pearl Harbor. And we went to Pearl Harbor just a few years back. We went out there to that monument deal, you know, whatever they call it, where the Arizona's land. You can see the reflections of it through the water. And there on that east wall was all the names of the boys that's down in the bottom. And I read them 1,156 names and had tears in my eyes continually. It's sad.
What did you do during the war, World War II?
World War I was a kid.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
World War I, you see, when it started, I was pretty young yet. And it ended before I was old enough. And World War II, of course, I had to register and all, but I had farming and had a family of children, you know, and they just never got rough enough where I had to go.
Did you do any work for the war effort?
Well, yes, we helped with the bond drives and whatever, you know, to help along, whatever you do. Yeah, you had to. It was everybody's responsibility.
Well, Mr.
I can give him a good argument on that is, I live in this country, my people brought me here and taught me, not by accident, but by choice. When I got my naturalization papers through my dad, the district judge, had me paged and he just wanted to talk to me, see what kind of a character I was. I was in my later teens. And we had a visit like we have here, talking about government and all. And he said, young man, he says, I can pretty well tell that you may not have had anything to say about it, but whoever raised you became a citizen of this country by choice and not by accident. He said, you'll make it in this country, there's no question about it. But my parents always taught me that freedom, you know, what we can't have freedom. There's a difference between freedom and do as you please, you know. And but this is our country, and why should you worry about any other, you know what I mean? I was taught this is a good country. Be satisfied. And I have traveled, my wife and me have. She didn't go with me quite all the way, but I have been from Rome by way of Greenland, Hawaii several times, to Seoul, Korea and back the last 3 years. And we've been all over Europe. We spent, last fall, we just got back from Switzerland. And oh, there is nice places when you got this American money to spend and all, but I'd hate to stay there and make a living. Hey, boy.
When did you get married?
1928.
What's your wife's name?
Emma Elizabeth Schultz was her maiden name. We got married on June the 2nd, 1928. We have 5 children. And the oldest daughter is an Army officer's wife. The man that's the commanding officer of White Sands Missile Range, that when the spacecraft Columbia landed there, you know, the guy they interviewed all the time and on TV, that's our son-in-law. He's going to retire in about another year. And then our youngest son and his wife, they are in the Army. He teaches military science at Fort Sam Houston, and she is a head nurse. She's got a major's commission in the nursing. And then another son is in the Army Reserve, because they don't have no contract with the government if they couldn't be separated like our youngest one has. They're both in the service, you see. So he got in the Army Reserve and does civil service work, and she is a major in the hospital. She was the head nurse of the hospital where they sent the casualties from the bombing in Lebanon. they was tore up bad. They lost five on that bunch after they got to the second general hospital in Germany. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Treiber, I want to thank you. We had a good interview.
Yeah, I got that interview, and when we get started visiting, that, as far as I'm concerned, I can find something to talk about all day.
Do you have any more about Russia?
Oh, not necessarily. It was they left there in the summer of 1907. They came by train through Poland, and Germany throwed up a barrier against Poland on the standard of living, so they gave me a shot when I was less than a year old, and then whenever I could find it, it's the size of $50 here, and they put that on there when I was, before I was a year old. And to this day, all I've ever had in my life was the mumps on one side. And they came through Poland into Germany to Hamburg, and that's the way you get on the ship. And the steamship that came across took about 7 days and a little over, and it belonged to the North Dutch Lloyd Steamship Company. I remember some papers I've seen on it. And they stopped at Liverpool, England, and filled her full of coal and all they needed, and they come across to New York.
Did you come to Ellis Island?
Yeah.
Did your parents ever talk about Ellis Island?
No, I had been there since then just to see what.
Did you watch that special on television? Did your parents ever talk about the boat trip?
Well, all I can remember is everybody gets seasick, of course, you know, but in them days it wasn't like, you know, you couldn't hold somebody responsible for every little thing like you can nowadays. They just, when you came across carload of immigrants, you know, why, and the railroad or anything, they just, like hauling cattle, if you want to go, get on, and if you, nobody help anybody, it's just dog eat dog. It's not like it is now. But it was a long trip.
Yep.
A long trip. We went to, it's unbelievable, we went to Korea. We had a chance, the kids lived over there for 1 year. So they just said, come over and let's see this end of the world. So we went over. And going over from Los Angeles, it's 12.5 hours non-stop. You head her west, northwest, and hang in there 12.5 hours. Coming back, they got in the jet stream, and 12 hours, 20-some minutes, we were in Oklahoma City.
Well, farming must be doing pretty good for you then, you travel so much.
Well, I don't make it farming. We do that for a hobby. No, we got pretty good gas. Well, that's how we do.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what, we've got 5 children, and they have their children, and I'll tell you what, it's going to have to be a very, very cold day in the middle of summer before we can't go and see a little grandbaby who's born overseas.
Okay, thank you.
You bet, thank you. We have
school. I went to school over here and go down after school, and they had a Boston Ledger.
Boston Ledger?
Everything done with pen and ink.
Yeah, okay. Today is December 13th, 1984, and my name is Joe Todd, and this is an interview with Mr. Verney Oates in Shattuck, Oklahoma.